Bonjour, good afternoon, and welcome to WASA Distance Education. My name is Greg Weaver, and this is ENG3C, Grade 11 College Prep English. I'd like to welcome everyone listening across the North today at home, your learning center, or on Bell Expressview. To call in and join our class, you can call 1-800-465-7144 or 737-4017 or 2983 in the Sioux Lookout, Lac Seul, or Dryden areas. I'd like to welcome everyone back to class today. We are going to be continuing to work on unit number 4. And we do have 3 classes left in our term. We have today, tomorrow, and Thursday. Now, for those students who may not have had the chance to be with us last little bit, we are into unit 4 now, which is looking at different types of poetry. And we are into lesson 19, so our second last lesson. And we are just starting to look at what do poems mean. For the first lesson, we looked at what are some different terms that are used when people write poetry. And then we looked at different types of poems in the last 2 lessons, lessons 17 and 18. And now we are looking at what do those poems mean. This is probably some of the hardest work that we're going to be doing because you're trying to figure out what the poet is writing about and what he means when he writes that when you don't have a whole lot of material to work with. When we do the same thing, we look at a novel or a short story. You'll have anywhere between normally 10 to 15 pages all the way up to the length of our novel, which was well over 300. With a poem, you only have a couple of stanzas, a couple of paragraphs. It's very short to work with. So what we are going to be doing today is continuing to work through lesson 19. So we started this yesterday or on Thursday's class, and we looked at our first poem, which is Durch de Est by Wilfred Owen. Now, this is a World War I poem written to try and disprove or show people what the reality of what war was like. It wasn't glorious, and it wasn't peaceful, like was portrayed in the media at the time. It was bloody. It was graphic. It was very traumatic. So we read through this poem by Wilfred Owen, and then we flipped to, and this is where we ended off. We were flipping to the very back of lesson 19, looking at page 28. And what we're going to do, we're going to look at each of these poets and the poem that's printed in our unit, as well as a couple of their other poems as well. As you can see, different styles and different examples from these exact same poets. So we're going to flip back down to page 28, where we see a biography of Wilfred Owen. So this was our poet who wrote it. So it says Wilfred Owen was born on the 18th of March, 1893 in Ulster, which is in the United Kingdom or in England. He was the eldest of 4 children and was brought up in the Anglican religion of the evangelical school. Now, for an evangelical, a man is not saved by the good he does, but by the faith he has in the redeeming power of Christ's sacrifice. Although he rejected much of this belief by 1913, its influence remains visible in his poems and their themes is based on his learning, his education. And those themes are such as sacrifice, biblical language, and his description of hell. He moved to Bordeaux, France in 1913 as a teacher of English in the Berlitz School of Languages. A year later, he was a private teacher in a prosperous family in the Pyrenees, which are the mountains that separate France from Spain. He enlisted in the Artists' Rifles on October 21st, 1915. There followed 14 months of training in England. He was drafted to France in 1917. That was the worst year of the war for winter. His total war experience was rather short. He only served for 4 months, of which only 5 weeks was served on the line. On this was based all of his war poetry. After battle experience, thoroughly shocked by the horrors of war, he went to Craig Lockhart War Hospital near Edinburgh. In August 1918, after his friend, the other great war poet Siegfried Sassoon, had been severely injured and sent back to England, Owen returned to France. The war was still as horrid as before. The butchery was ended on November 11th, 1918, 11 o'clock. 7 days before, Wilfred Owen had been killed in one of the last vain battles of the war. So what I want to do, I'll show you a bit more of his poetry. So I want to show you a bit more of his writing. So I'm going to go to Google, and we're just going to search Wilfred Owen poems. We'll find a lot here. As well, we'll find. I'm going to open his Wikipedia page and see. So this is what he looked like. And some of his poems are here. So we have one we just read, Dulce de Coram Est, Insensibility, Anthem for Doomed Youth, Futility, and Strange Meeting. I'll have a couple of these because they're really interesting ones I want to look at. So he's born, went to school, and then enlisted in the Artists' Rifles. He was training and training. Was in war and then met another guy named Siegfried Sassoon. And then he eventually went back to return to service. He chose to go back because his friend was injured. So at the very end, he led an attack. And before he was killed during the crossing the Sambo Canal, 1 week before the war ended. So we'll see what that looks like too. So it's called the greatest poet before. The greatest poet of World War One. And we'll look at both these. We got one of his first famous poems, Dulce de Coram Est. I'll read Anthem for Doomed Youth next. And that is what we will be looking at for this one as well. And then, so that's a bit depiction of who he is. So what we're going to do, this is where he was killed crossing. It's a connection with little small canal. So you see where this just talks about where he was killed. Let's just quickly read it over. You can always pause the recording and look at it as well. And this is his friend, Siegfried Sassoon. And then this is the probably his second most famous poem one we read. So this is the same poet, Wilfred Owen, and you'll see similar things as well here. So uh, sorry, I thought I had a link here to it. So we'll find out in here then. So this is the his other really famous poem. So it says, "What passing bells for these die as cattle, or monsters anger of the guns? Only stuttering rifles' rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. No mockeries for them, no prayers nor bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choirs. Their shrill demented choirs of wailing shells, and bugles calling for them from the sad shires. What candles may help to speed them all? Not in the eyes of boys, but in their eyes shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall, their flowers and tenders of patient minds, each slow dusk a dying dawn of blinds." So this is another fairly famous poem, and once again talks about just how the war was not as glorious as it made out to be. It was pretty depressing. It was very tragic, and it refers to soldiers here as cattle, showing that their lives really didn't mean much. So that's one example there. And the last one we're looking at is what's called Strange Meeting. So it's another one that was written. It was published right before he went back to the war. So this one is fairly long, but it talks about how a soldier goes underground and sees the body of an enemy soldier that he shot the day before. But it seemed like all the battle I escaped down some profound dull tunnel long since scooped. Through grants where titanic wars had groined, and their covered sleepers groaned. Keep fast and thought our death to be bestirred. Then I probed them, one sprang up and stared. With piteous recognition and fixed eyes, lifting his stressful hands as if to bless. And by his smile I knew that sullen hall. By his smile I knew he stood in hell. Give a thousand fears that vision's faces grain, yet no blood reached him for upper ground, and no guns thumped or done the flues made moan. Strange, friend, I said, here you have no cause to mourn. None, said the other, save the undone years, the hopelessness, whatever hope is yours was mine also. I went hunting wild after wildest beauty in the world, which lies not calm in eyes or braided hair, but locks and steady the running hour, and grieves it grieves richer than here. For by my glee might men have laughed, and my weeping done have been left. But now must I am untruth untold, the pity of war, the pity war distilled. The men will go content with what we spoiled, or discontent boil bloody and be spilled. They will be swift as swiftness of tigress, and none break ranks, so nations tread from progress. Courage was mine, I had but mystery. Wisdom was mine, I had mastery. to miss the marches of treating world into vain citadels that were not walled. Then, with much blood that clogged the chariot wheels, I would go up and wash them from sweet wells. Even with truths that lie too deep for taint, I would pour my spirit to a stout stint, but not in excessive war. For it's a man of blood where no wounds were. I'm round you killed, my friend? You frowned. You say three drabbed and killed. I parried my hammer with loathsome cold. Let us sleep now. So that's one example. What we're going to do next, we're going to jump back to our unit, and we're going to look at our next poem and now analyze that. Our next one is a sonnet by William Shakespeare. He's a very famous playwright. He wrote a lot of plays, and he also wrote poetry. Normally it's known as sonnets. So Shakespeare wrote a total of 154 sonnets. An impressive achievement considering how difficult the sonnet form can be. Especially when using language such as English that does not rhyme well. Sonnet 116 is one of the most famous sonnets. While the language can be difficult to understand, if you read through a poem 2 or 3 times, the correct analysis of all, you understand it a bit more. So first thing I want to point out with the sonnets, it has a very distinct form. And what I want to do is actually want to label what the form is so you can see exactly how it shapes up and looks. So first, it goes A B A B. So let me not to marriage of true minds amid impediments. Love is not love, which alters when it alters finds, or bends with remove to remove. So minds, finds, love, remove are most of our rhymes. Notes are a fixed mark that looks on tablets and is never shaken, that looks at every wandering bark, whose words are known as heights be taken. So we have C, D, C, D. So A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D. With his bending sickle's compass come, love alters not with its brief and hours and weeks, but it bears out even to the edge of doom. So we have love's not times full, rose in cheeks. We have E, so you have an E, F, cheeks, and weeks come and doom. Kind of go together. So E, F, E, F, and then prove loved is our GG. So you have everything rhymes almost all together. Some are not perfect. Remember, when this was originally written, English was a lot different. This poem comes from the 1500s. And so because of that, the English language has evolved and changed. So words that don't rhyme now most likely would have rhymed when this poem was written almost 500 years ago. So I'll read it again, and then we'll look at some of the poetry analysis and get a bit more detail on this sonnet. So let me not to the merit of true minds amid impediments. Love is not love which alters when it alterations finds, or bends with remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark that looks on tempest and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worst unknown, though his height be taken. Love's not time's full, though rosy lips and cheeks, with his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. If this be error upon me proved, I never writ, nor I never loved. So if you want to, you can read that once more on your own, but we're not going to do it in class. But what we are going to look at is our analysis that goes along with this. Now, first thing we have to know is that sonnets are originally written to convey love. There's different types of sonnets. This is known as an English sonnet. There's Petrarchan sonnets. There's Italian sonnets. They're all basic forms. If you go on to study English at university, you will learn more about these, but that's beyond the scope of our course here. But this sonnet deals with love. That's what sonnets are written for originally, and that's what this one deals with. The theme that Shakespeare is portraying is that true love is only love when it's eternal. That is, love does not change with time. He makes this point through several comparisons. It's an ever fixed mark if it is the star to every wandering bark. In the second example, Shakespeare is comparing love to the North Star that guides sailors. Now, Shakespeare uses personification or giving human emotions to non-human qualities several times. He personifies time and is bending sickle's compass. So all that ties back into we looked at back in lesson 16 when we looked at personification. And we flip ahead to page 28. You'll see Shakespeare's biography. So, Shakespeare's born to John Shakespeare and Mary Arden sometime in late April in 1564. So that's almost 450 years ago in a place known as Stratford-upon-Avon. There's no record of his birth, but his baptism was recorded at the local church, and thus his birthday is assumed to be the 23rd of April. They figure that out because normally children were baptized normally in between 3 and 5 days after they were born. We have a record of when he was baptized. That's why you can assume it probably was around the 23rd of April. His father was a prominent and prosperous alderman or councillor in the town of Stratford-upon-Avon and was later granted a coat of arms by the College of Heralds. All that is known of Shakespeare's youth is that he presumably, or is assumed, to have attended the Stratford Grammar School and did not go on to study at either Oxford University or Cambridge University. Now, the next record we have of him is when he got married to Anne Hathaway, and that was in 1582. So he got married when he was 18. The next year, she bore a daughter named Susanna, and then twins, Judith and Hamnet, 2 years later. So, 7 years later, Shakespeare is recognized as an actor, a poet, and a playwright. When a rival playwright, Robert Greene, refers to him as an upstart crow in a book called The Groat's Worth of Wit. A few years later, he's joined up with one of the most successful acting troupes in London, the Lord Chamberlain's Men. When, in 1599, the troupe lost the lease of the theater they were performing, which is called the Theater, they were wealthy enough to build their own across the Thames in the south of London, which they called the Globe Theatre. When King James I came to the throne in 1603, the troupe was designated by the new king as the King's Men, or the King's Company. Now, Shakespeare entertained the king and the people for another 10 years, until June 19th, 1613, when a cannon fired from the roof of the theater for a gala performance of Henry VIII set fire to the thatch roof and burned the theater to the ground. And there's a little typo there I gotta fix. Give me 1 second. The audience ignored the smoke from the roof and at first, being too absorbed in the play, until the flames caught the walls and the fabric of the curtains. Now, amazingly, no one was killed or injured. And the next spring, the company had the theater new builded in a far fairer manner than before. Although Shakespeare invested in the rebuilding, he retired from the stage to the great house of New Place at Stratford, where he purchased in 1597 and some considerable land holdings, where he continued to write until his death in 1616 on the day of his 52nd birthday. So when he died, that was around the average age that people lived to at that time period. So that's what we know about him. A bit more background for him, just so we a bit clear. If you want to figure exactly where he was born, we can go to Google Maps. It'll show us roughly where he's from. So we go to Stratford upon Avon in the UK. So we'll keep zooming out. Give me a second. We'll put a little marker here. So that's where he was born, was Stratford-upon-Avon. So he's a fair ways from London. London's way down here. So it may seem pretty close. So if we look at Stratford-upon-Avon to go to London, it's only 160 kilometers. But thinking that there was no trains, there was no trains, no cars, and most people couldn't afford horses. So you had to walk there and walk home. So normally you could average around 10 to 15 kilometers a day was the average. So you're looking at, depending how fast you walk, between 10 and 16 days before you could get to London and then back. And so we have, and it's what it's called Stratford-upon-Avon, is this river here is the River Avon. So you see all along, there's Stratford-upon-Avon, Welford-upon-Avon, you have Bidford-upon-Avon. Everything is where all these places are built along the River Avon before it eventually drains out into this area here, which is the Bristol Channel, and that area into this part here is where it eventually drains into the Severn River. So, with that in mind, we're going to jump into our next one now, because I want to make sure we have enough time to get everything done today. Our last poet is named W.H. Auden. Now, this is a more modern poet. He was born in 1907 and he only died in 1973. So his style of poetry is a lot different from the poetry of the last two. It's a different style. And we will talk over him with his poems. The poem is called Lullaby. So it's lay your sleeping head, my love, human on my faithless arm. Time and fevers burn away, individual beauty from. Thoughtful children in the grave proves the child ephemeral. But in my arms till break of day, let the living creatures lie. Mortal guilty, but to me they're entirely beautiful. Soul and body have no bounds. To lovers they lie upon. Her tolerant enchanted slope in their ordinary swoon. Grave the vision of Venus sends of supernatural sympathy. Universal love and hope with an abstract insight wakes among the glaciers and the rocks, the hermit's carnal ecstasy. Certainly fidelity and the stroke of midnight pass like vibrations of a bell and fashionable madmen rise. Their pedantic, boring cry. Every farthing of the cost, all the dreaded cards foretell shall be paid, but not this night. Not a whisper, not a thought, not a kiss, look be lost. Midnight beauty, vision dies. Let the winds of dawn that blow round softly your dreaming head, such a day of welcome show. Eye of knocking of hearts, and may bless our finer mortal world enough. Noons of dryness find you fed by the involuntary powers. Nights of insult let you pass, watched by every human love. So this ties seems a little challenging, but if we look at your analysis, this poem is basically a love poem. T.H. Auden creates a mental picture of lovers at rest. They're just lying there, just relaxing together. One of the main figure devices that he uses is personification. The second line is just the beginning. He writes, on my faithless arm. In addition, he personifies time, certainty, soul, and body. This creates for the reader a sense that these concepts are as real as the lovers themselves. Moreover, it allows him to use them more actively than passively. In the third stanza, Auden uses a simile, certainty, fidelity, and a stroke of midnight pass, like vibrations of the bell, to create a clear picture of the reader's mind of the disappearance of these concepts. The simile is particularly appropriate because associated most people have a bells tolling at midnight. The hyperbole at the end of the poem, watched by every human love, is used to make the poem universal. The form of the poem is free verse with no apparent rhyme scheme, which is different than a true lullaby. However, the longer stanzas do have a pattern of sorts. Each of the final three stanzas begins with the personification of those concepts. It's also interesting to observe that in terms of voice, T.H. Auden moves from the first person, where speakers addressing as a lover, to the third person for the middle stanzas, and then back into the first person at the end on the final stanza that's there. So with that in mind, we're going to take a quick look at his biography and what we know about him. So you can find that on page 30 of your unit. This is a lot longer. So Winston Hugh Auden was born in York, England in 1907. He moved to Birmingham during his childhood and was educated at Christ's Church, Oxford, which is a different college or different campus of Oxford University. Now, as a young man, he was influenced by the poetry of Thomas Hardy, Robert Frost, as well as William Blake, Emily Dickinson, Gerhard Manley Hopkins, and Old English poetry. At Oxford, his precocity or his skill as a poet were immediately apparent, and he formed lifelong friendships with two fellow writers, Stephen Spender and Christopher Isherwood. Now, in 1928, Auden published his first book of verse, and his collection of poems, published in 1930, established him as a leading voice of a new generation. Ever since, he's been admired for his unsurpassed technical virtuosity and an ability to write poems in nearly every imaginable verse form. The incorporation of his work of popular culture, current events, and vernacular speech, also for the vast range of his intellect, which he drew easily from an extraordinary variety of literatures, art forms, social and political theories, and scientific and technical information. He had a remarkable wit and often mimicked the rhyming styles of other poets as Dickinson, W.B. Yeats, and Henry James. His sort figure accounts later metaphorically, a journey or a quest, and his travels provide a rich material for his poems. He visited Germany, Iceland, and China. He served in the Spanish Civil War, and in 1939 he moved to the U.S., where he met his lover, Chester Coleman, and became an American citizen. His own beliefs changed radically between his youthful career in England, when he was an ardent advocate of socialism and Freudian psychoanalysis, and his later phase in America, where his central preoccupation became Christianity and a theology of modern Protestant theologians. A prolific writer, he also noted playwright, essayist, or librettist is known for essayist, editor, and he generally considered the greatest English poet of the 20th century, depending on who you talk to. His work has exerted a major influence on succeeding generation of poets on both sides of the Atlantic. He served as a chancellor in the Academy of American Poets from 1954 until 1973, and divided most of his second half of his life between residence in New York City and in Austria. And he died in Vienna, Austria in 1973. That's a bit about him and what he does. Now, I want to get a bit more detail. We do a bit more before we look at the support questions. So if we go into here, we'll go fire back up Google again, and we're going back to Wikipedia, just really quickly. And we are going to just search for W.H. Auden. This is what he looked like. There's a lot more detail on this than will be in the little biography that we looked at. And he talks about all of what he wrote about in his famous works. So let's give us a whole bunch of detail. What we want to focus in on you'll see it's called different periods or different time periods for his poetry. As he got older, what he wrote of and what he believed changed. So you can, if you want to more detail, you can read through this on your own. What we are going to do is we have about 5 minutes or so left, and we are going to um, jump into our support questions you can find on page 31. If you look at page 31, you'll see another example of what you're going to do when you get to the key question for this unit. So it says, read the poem below, which is Mother to Son by Langston Hughes. Now, Langston Hughes is also another famous poet. He was American. And he made sure because he was an African American poet. So his poem is called Mother to Son. Now, preparing for the poetry analysis, you'll be writing as the key question. You will answer some analytical questions about the poem below. So answer the following, and once again, it starts. There could be some suggested answers at the back of your unit. So, first thing, what message is the author trying to convey? What are some figurative devices that the author uses? How did these figurative language contribute to the theme you outlined? What's the format of the poem? Is it significant? How does the format contribute to the theme? And then choose 2 images from the poem that are particularly powerful. Why are those images so important? What would the poem be like if you didn't have them there? So here's our poem here. It says, Mother to Son. I said, well, son, I'll tell you. Life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks on it and splinters and boards torn up. And placed with no carpet on the floor, bare. But all the time, I's been climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners. And sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So, boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on the steps, 'cause you'll find it kind of harder. Don't you fall now, for I's still going, honey. I's still climbing. And for me, life ain't being no crystal stair. So before you even look again at these support questions, obviously it's a mother giving a message to her sons, and obviously it's like she's saying that life is not easy. Life won't be handed to you. It takes time to work at. So as we think about that, we get into these 4 support questions. And what I want you to do is I want you to work on these 4 support questions tonight. We will ending off here. We'll end a few minutes ago. Don't want to give a chance to work on this. So you're going to have to work on these 4 questions and just explore what you think this poem is looking at. When we come into class tomorrow, we will take up these answers, and then we will look at key question 23, which you're going to have to do a poetry of your own. You'll have to find your own poem, and you'll need to work through that. So work through the support question answers. I'll give you some ideas and suggestions where you could find poems for your analysis. And then we'll jump into lesson 20 tomorrow as well. Reminder that Thursday is our last class. Talk to everyone